The service bay on Halcyon Orbital smelled of hot metal, scorched polymer, and the faint, acrid perfume of recycled air, the odor of things people keep working on until they behave again. Jonah Cade had learned to love that scent over the last 15 years. He'd arrived at 17 with grubby hands and a stubborn promise to himself. At 32, he ran Cade's dock, a tiny maintenance slip squeezed between a noodle stall that burned oil at all hours and a pawnshop that specialized in obsolete navigational relics. His customers were the usual: long haulers, freelance couriers, and an unlucky tourist who'd trusted a rental with a faulty seal. Jonah charged fair rates, did clean work, and went home each night to a one-room apartment and a cat named Marmalade who tolerated him with polite disdain. It was the kind of life he preferred. Manageable, honest, unremarkable. Until the day an eldercraft coasted into view like a cut jewel. He was under a cargo sled, the owner, a broad-tusked trader from the Karani Moons, standing over him and blinking in the harsh hangar light. Jonah finished a final probe and hauled himself free, hands streaked with grease and the shine of coolant. "She'll run," he said to the trader. "But you're cooking the coils. You stop pushing them past design specs, she won't come back here." "Schedules don't ask permission," the trader muttered, but he handed over the deposit. He trusted Cade's dock. Tradesmen did. Jonah reached for his scanner when the far bay doors sighed open. Not the main gate near the tram, but the private access reserved for vessels that paid for discretion. The ship that slid through was not a yardbird. It was an Eldry ceremonial cruiser, long, with surfaces that refracted light in slow, liquid shifts between sea glass green and pearl. Scorch marks lined one nacelle and a spiderweb of cracks patterned the forward glazing, but even wounded it carried the composure of old money. "That's not ours, Hux," Jonah's lead tech, squat and always skeptical, said from parts. "We don't get that kind of manifest." 3 figures walked the ramp. 2 were security, tall, angular, and pale as carved bone, their movements precise and wary. The 3rd was the sort of presence that rearranged the air. She moved slowly, each step measured, wrapped in a robe of deep indigo embroidered with thin lines that pulsed faintly like distant beacons. A heavy circlet sat at her throat. She was ancient by Eldry standards. Her skin had the translucence of someone who had watched centuries tilt, and yet her posture carried the restraint of a lifetime of command. She spoke in a stream of Eldrin, quick, precise, and tightly coiled with irritation. Jonah felt something inside the sound press against a memory he kept folded away. His chest tightened like a hand had clutched it. Hux mouthed a word Jonah didn't catch. The younger security officer answered in broken trade standard. "Matriarch, the outer yards are full. There is only this berth with clearance." "We will not discuss our needs through a machine," the matriarch snapped. "We will not entrust the nuances of ceremony and protocol to a voice. Send a translator." "Wait." Her gaze swept the hangar and landed on Jonah's oil-streaked bench with the clinical disinterest of someone appraising a curiosity. Jonah opened his mouth before he could weigh the consequences. "Perhaps my hands might be of use," he said, and the words spilled out in Eldrin. Time folded. Hux made a small animal sound that might have been alarm. The 2 guards froze, then turned their heads toward Jonah like 2 statues detecting heat. The matriarch's face drained of authority and recollection blossomed across her features. A thin breath escaped her that sounded less like surprise and more like a physical reorientation. "What did you say?" she whispered, in Eldrin. Jonah stepped forward, aware suddenly of grease in his hair and the rag still hanging from his back pocket. "I offered assistance, honored matriarch. I work with older drive systems, and I speak enough Eldrin to be useful. Forgive any unevenness in my accent." She stared, and in the slow reading of her expression Jonah watched history move. "You speak with the coastal inflection of the Singing Cliffs," she said, not as a question. It was not just a place. It was a memory. "I have not heard that dialect in decades. Not since the one who left our shores." The repair was not hard. A micrometeorite had nicked part of the ship's harmonic stabilizer, a problem that became a puzzle only when you had to work through Eldry modular access panels that hid their seams like a smile. Jonah crawled into the ship's belly, tools tucked into every pocket, while the matriarch sat on a crate and watched with the close attention of someone reacquainting herself with a lost part of herself. "Tell me about her," the matriarch said finally, not asking politely but needing to hear the name that would shore her memory up. Jonah paused, a small dampener still in his hand. Her name was Marin Whitaker. She was from a small green world. They called the place Webster Ridge in the old colony charts. She left when she was young. How did she learn our tongue? The matriarch asked. Jonah felt the knot he'd carried since childhood, the secret the grandmother had tucked away like a coin. He told the brief version he'd told himself 100 times. Marin had once pulled a starfarer from a ruined vessel, shared water and warmth during a long drift, and in return the stranger had taught her their language. She never explained more, and she never sought anything in return. Jonah had grown up with the cadence of those alien vowels in his ears and the knowledge that language could be a small, living inheritance. The matriarch's eyes glistened. I thought the one who saved me had been forgotten, she said. I thought a debt could never be repaid. She taught our words and left like wind. Her voice broke. Tell me her name again. Jonah told it. Marin Whitaker. Something like a bridge formed between them then, a fragile span of memory and sorrow. The matriarch, Illyra Vashon, laughed with a sound that held both apology and relief. You carry her syllables like a talisman. She looked at Jonah with a consideration that made him feel naked and treasured at once. When the formalities were done, Illyra surprised everyone by refusing translator officers. She insisted Jonah finish the calibrations with her at his elbow, asking questions in the old coastal dialect that Jonah's grandmother had whistled while she polished wrenches late at night. The hours collapsed into a private exchange. Stories about Marin's quick hands and sharper laugh, Illyra's reckless voyage to chart forbidden lanes, the way small acts of kindness become maps on which lives travel. At the end of the day, with the cruiser humming like a satisfied animal, Illyra folded her hands and said simply, I would like you to come with me. Jonah blinked. Where? To the council at Lyris Spire, she replied. We are convening, representatives from hundreds of polities, and I will be there. I need someone who knows what it is to speak plainly, to say what must be said without ceremony. I would not ask this of another. You know our words. You have no stake in our protocol. You were raised by the woman who kept my memory. Come as an interpreter, come as a fixer, or come to see how the sky looks from a place where decisions are carved. Jonah thought of Cade's dock, the single bed, Marmalade's silent accusation. He thought of all the evenings he'd spent telling himself that small work was honest work, that a quiet life sufficed. He thought of Marin, who had handed him a language like a compass and then died with it in her pocket. How long would I be gone? He asked. A matter of months, Illyra said. Enough for a change. Not a theft. He agreed. He never expected the journey to be a turning point. He expected only curiosity and a short trip away from the gravity of his routine. The cruiser was a ship of craft and quiet extravagance. Corridors flowed around light wells, and observation alcoves offered views of stars so clean they felt like salt. Jonah had quarters that were larger than his entire apartment, a mattress that remembered his sleeping posture, and an engine bay he could sleep in if he wanted. On the third day, he met the woman who would become the hinge of the rest of the story. She came to the engine room with a steady gait, arms folded, and an expression like someone who had been promised the universe and found it filled with other people's expectations. Arieth Vashon, Illyra's granddaughter, was younger, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, and suspicion had trained her to lower her guard but never drop it. She wore the plain gray of those who do not seek spectacle. You're the technician who speaks coastal Eldrin, she said without preface. That's the rumor, Jonah returned. Jonah Cade. Technician. Sometimes engineer if the paperwork's generous. They sparred like people trying to find a useful cadence toward each other. He teased about ambition. She replied about obligations. He confessed that if he could do anything, he'd still tinker on engines. Maybe somewhere with fresher stars. She admitted she wanted to study living things, to unravel how different anatomies fit together, but had been groomed for diplomacy, not lab nights. Have you told your grandmother? Jonah asked. Many times, Arieth said. And she says, after duty, then curiosity. I'm not sure when later becomes never. The honesty in her voice caught Jonah off guard. He found himself asking fewer clever questions after that and simply listening. 3 weeks later, the test came. An alarm, a low, whole-body thrum, rolled through the cruiser. Medical red, said the panels. Jonah ran. He found Illyra in her quarters, the regal posture gone slack, skin like spun glass, breathing thin and jagged. Physicians surrounded her, algorithms blinking unfamiliar warnings. What happened? Jonah demanded. A resonant organ collapse, the chief elderly physician answered, a condition their medics had seen but never in such accelerated decline. Systems failing in sequence. We can slow the process but not reverse it where we are. The nearest specialized facility is days away. And then, we can try collaborative emergency protocols, someone offered, the room full of cross-discipline fear. It's untested. Jonah did not have medical training. He did, however, know systems. How a drive could cascade out of sync, how a small imbalance in feedback loops could mushroom into catastrophe. He looked at the assembled medical officers, elderly specialists who regarded human improvisation like a risky solvent, and made what felt like the only honest choice. Explain it to me, he said. Tell me what you're trying to stabilize. If I can help coordinate, tell me what tool you're missing. You've got the hands. You might be missing the system view. Arieth surprised him then. She stepped forward, voice quiet but precise. If we don't act together, she dies, she said. We need to open ourselves to the unfamiliar. Protocol 17, Mutual Emergency Collaboration, exists for a reason. Invoke it. Protocol 17 was a dusty name in interstellar law. Invoking it required authority and courage. Arieth had both in the moment, and with the matriarch's barely audible assent, the Assembly's medical center agreed to take Illyra and accept the combined team. What followed was 2 days of tenacity. The medical center's architecture was a cathedral of comparative biology. Modular bays that could be reconfigured for chitin, chlorophyll, or the soft grasses of bile. But Illyra's collapse bucked every textbook. Organs dimmed like stars under eclipse. Choices that helped one system would drag another lower. Jonah became a conduit. Not a doctor but a mechanic of systems. He listened to geneticists and elderly pathologists, translated metaphors into diagrams, suggested tests that fit together like missing cogs. Arieth became a revelation. The diplomatic heir who'd secretly studied xenomedicine leapt forward into the work she had only dreamed about. She read metabolism graphs until fatigue hardened the edges of her mind, drew correlations across species, and proposed an off-protocol intervention, a cross-species metabolic rebalancer patched from adaptations meant for a molluscoid physiology. No one could promise success. Jonah had a strange mixture of dread and stubbornness. If you don't try, the only guaranteed outcome is the one they feared. Illyra, sparking back into consciousness between sedatives and machine breaths, heard Arieth's plan and, with a soft, surprised chuckle, said, "Then do it." Her voice was a thread pulling taut. I trust her. They adapted the rebalancer. For 6 hours teams dosed, monitored, and sandwiched parameters. Jonah watched through the observation window as numbers slowly reversed. The cascade halted, the regress turned toward stabilization. When the final reading flattened into a steady line, Jonah felt the kind of relief he had only ever known after a stubborn drive settled into proper rhythm. He wept. Not elegant, not cinematic, but real. The matriarch recovered in days instead of the expected week, and with recovery came another change. Arieth, who had been polite to the point of resignation, now stood straighter. She had tasted what she could do when rules bent for a cause she loved. She told her grandmother, finally and without circumlocution, that she wanted to study xenobiology, to make a career of cross-species medicine. Illyra listened, then began to laugh, a sharp, disbelieving sound that softened into a blessing. You wasted your life being careful, Illyra told her, and I wasted my life being afraid. Let neither of us teach you how to be afraid. When the council business ended, offers came not as patronizing gifts but as real chance. Illyra proposed a new educational exchange to the consortium, a program where physicians, biologists, and cultural liaisons would study together and craft treatments that worked across bodies and across worlds. Arieth would join as a founding scholar, and Jonah, whose real skill had always been seeing how systems failed and how to make them better, was asked to help build and run the program as a practical director. Jonah hesitated. Cade's Dock, Marmalade, the small apartment, they all tugged. But Marin's voice, the one in his head that had learned to say words that belonged to two shores, reminded him that small acts ripple. He said yes. Months later, the Cade Vashon Center for Comparative Medicine opened on a neutral moon, housed in a clean, angular building ringed with classrooms, wet labs, and quiet rooms for conversation. Jonah worked long days and loved them for reasons he hadn't expected. The work was messy, meaningful, and full of people who broke things and learned how to fix them better. Arieth thrived in the labs, and Illyra visited often, sitting in a softly padded chair and trading jokes with technicians who had once found diplomacy dry. Years passed. The center grew into a hub of cross-disciplinary discovery. In the East Atrium, a small display drew visitors. A faded photograph of a woman with autumn hair and an easy smile. Marin Whitaker, and beside it a slim, worn data plate. The inscription read differently from the old plaque Jonah had made in his head. This one said, "A single kindness creates a lineage of care." On the anniversary of the center's founding, students and faculty gathered and told the story of a broken ship, a shared language held in a grandmother's memory, and two women from different worlds who taught others how to speak across the divides. Jonah stood at the edge of the crowd and watched Arieth speak into the light, her voice steady, luminous with hard-earned confidence. After the ceremony, Jonah found himself at a window, watching the stars wheel in their indifferent, beautiful ways. Arieth came and leaned against the glass beside him. "Your grandmother would be proud," she said softly. "So would yours," Jonah replied. They stood together in that small silence, both hearing the echo of someone who had once risked everything to help a stranger. In the end, Jonah realized, the language hadn't been only for words. It had been a way back into bravery. For Marin, for Illyra, for Arieth, and for him. It had been a way to be heard. Decades later, the Cade Vashon Center's East Archive kept two small relics. The autumn-haired photograph and the data plate with its simple phrase. Students paused there often, reading the line, then reading it again, and passing the quiet story on. A reminder that the smallest currency of the cosmos is the decision to do a good thing when it is within your power to act.